Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 40 of the Brighter Horizons podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about cynicism, and we're going to debate about whether it's ruining your life or not. I'm taking the stance of it is.
Well, I mean, we also have to discuss what cynicism is because I have a bad feeling that we both have different definitions.
I'd say that it's a complex topic, but after reading and listening to a lot of literature about cynicism, I have become completely fascinated with how the brain works. And there's actually, I have a lot more respect for psychologists now than I did before, because studying the brain is a very complex matter, and things like cynicism are not easy to condense down into writing. But hopefully by the end of this episode, you guys will see the pros and cons of cynicism, what it is, and whether you're a cynic, and also what steps you should take to go forward from here and how to make your life better. Without further ado, let's get started. So how do you define cynicism?
Okay, the cynicism that I looked into is the philosophy of cynicism, right? Starting from, what's his name? Diogenes, precisely. And living outside of societal norms, not doing the same thing that everybody else is doing, and seeking happiness and pleasure in simple things.
That's what the Greek philosophy of cynicism is?
That's what it is.
Interesting. Because the way that it's funny because when I listened to an episode of Chris Williamson's podcast about this, and he was talking with the psychologist who I used for a quote of the week on the episode about empathy, Jamil Zaki. In that episode, they literally opened the episode up by saying that psychologists don't define cynicism the same way that Greek philosophers did.
Well, I guess scientific cynicism and philosophical cynicism must just be two different things.
Interesting.
Because I looked in philosophical cynicism because I think that it actually did spark a really good idea for me. And the idea being that there are so many different philosophies out there that you don't need to follow one. My point is to collectively take things from all the different types of philosophies and create your own almost. Because I feel like people find themselves bound by philosophy, like, oh, okay, I'm a Stoic, so I have to do everything that aligns with Stoicism, even if I don't think it's right. Because I'm a Stoic, I have to do it. But if you open your eyes more and think that I can be my own person, you can take things from here, take things from there. That's what separates today's world from the olden days, right? Way back when, people didn't have the thought process to think differently as much, right? People were always, okay, it's the same way, especially in, Rome and stuff like that. They had extremely Christian values. They believe in this. Oh, well, I don't think that was Rome. Rome must have been, I don't know my history,
it's Catholic.
Though. Yeah,
Roman is Catholic, I believe.
Either way, the idea of, Christianity or Catholicism, most people didn't question those religions because it's just what they just believed what they were told. But nowadays, as we move forward, we find that people are creating new ideas. Right? People are far more innovative than they used to be. So I think that people boxing themselves up and aligning themselves with this idea of who I have to be is foolish because you can take things from different sources and create something new that is your own.
Okay, did you get a sentence that describes how Diogenes explained cynicism?
Not from his word, but I know his story.
Okay, why don't you tell me that story?
So Diogenes, do you know the story? Or you
no, I actually don't know.
So Diogenes' story was that he was, a philosopher in, I believe, in Greece or some area, okay?
Okay.
And, this is during everybody's trying to get money and fame and power and all this kind of stuff, right? So what Diogenes said is, I don't need any of that, right? He said, I am going to go and live in a barrel. So he slept, and ate in a barrel. While everybody else had houses and stuff, he lived in a barrel. And he also went out into the woods and, scavenged for food and stuff like that. Lived in full just nature mode, right? He didn't have anything that anybody else had. He just went out there in nature. And everybody called him crazy. Everybody called him psychotic. This guy would, walk around and just pee in public, right? So, to be fair, some psychotic behavior. So he was a freaky dude and doing things that nobody else was doing. He was completely breaking societal norms. He wouldn't break laws per se, but he would do things that nobody else was doing. And his whole point, that origins of cynicism, was surrounding the idea that you can find happiness in things that other people don't think, or your happiness should not basically be defined by these materialistic possessions that you get, right? Because back then, everybody's happiness was how much money am I getting, how much honor am I getting, how much women am I getting? How much food am I getting? Right? That's what was important to people. So Diogenes was saying, that's not what's important to me, right? I'm happy to just live my own way, to be different from everybody else. And he, built up a following, and then a bunch of people started to do the same thing. But I believe after he passed, people began to misconstrue cynicism, right? Because that was originally what cynicism was. It was just living outside of societal norms. And then people began to say, like, they would, I don't want to say degrade, but they would belittle people who followed societal norms, saying, oh, you're just like a sheep or something like that. But they weren't actually doing anything of substance themselves. So they consider themselves cynics, but they still search for money, power, and fame. But they just criticize everybody else for doing the same. So that's kind of where it evolved. But I think that as time has gone on, it has kind of reverted a bit more back. And people are understanding that. I don't remember. There's a video I watched that explained like modern day cynicism, but I can't really remember too much of how what it really explained. But the basic premise of the cynicism philosophy is doing things that are outside of societal norms because that brings you happiness.
Interesting. Well, the way that psychologists define cynicism, and I believe the broad understanding of it, is a inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self-interest. That is the Wikipedia the Merriam-Webster definition of cynicism. But also, interestingly enough, how psychologists defined it can be written in a different wording. They also said that cynicism is what happens when you turn negativity bias into a worldview. So let me explain what that means. Negativity bias, obviously, is the tendency to put emphasis on negative events, I'd say, or negative information. For example, if you hear a statistic about, let's say, a certain group of people and their crime rates, you assume that all of them are criminals, right? That is what negativity bias is.
Yeah.
Now, imagine taking that and applying that to every aspect of your life, where you don't give people the benefit of the doubt, where all you think about is, oh, these people are out to get me. I can't trust anyone because I've been hurt before. That is essentially how psychologists define cynicism in modern times. So I'd say that is negative.
I think the two go more hand in hand than you may think, because I do recall them talking about that kind of a definition.
Yeah.
But this is where I'd raise the question to you. Is being selfish bad? If you live your life for your own pleasure and your own happiness, would you consider that bad? Because I think it's very complicated, because it's a question of, you are brought into this world, and most of the time people just say, oh, do what makes you happy. But that's not really what we actually allow people to do. If you really think about it, we don't praise people for being happy. We praise people for helping others or being virtuous or being this idea of what's good.
Yeah.
Right? So if your idea of happiness doesn't align with what everybody else considers to be virtuous, have you succeeded in life?
I think that it depends more so on what you define as selfish, because to me, I think that at times you need to be selfish for yourself, but selfish cannot be a way of life. I think that you can certainly live for yourself, because at the end of the day, we're all put on this earth as a sole creature, right? We're not attached to other people physically. So their well-being doesn't really impact us in any way, shape, or form. But I think that it is good to promote good in the world.
Yeah.
So by extension, helping other people promotes good in the world. But also, promoting your own happiness is also still something. You're still a part of this world, right? So you need to be happy too. So while I believe that being selfish at times is important, if you make it a way of life, I think that takes it to extremism. And realistically, all ideologies and philosophies become detrimental at the extreme end.
But I would say, what about somebody who just doesn't have any impact? They just go do their job, come home, live their own life. They don't interact with other people. They just live in their own world. And they're happy with that,
Do you
right?
consider that selfishness?
I don't know, because I think if you live for yourself, it's selfishness, but selfishness isn't bad. I think people just have this negative connotation towards it because it's considered to be a bad thing. but doing things for yourself isn't a bad thing.
I think that selfishness at the expense of others is what people have categorized as bad.
But that's my question is how do you balance it? Because if, for example, if I have to shoot myself to save you, you got two options: kill somebody or kill yourself to save somebody. I think a bunch of people in that scenario, if you said that to a lot of people, I'm willing to bet you, a lot of people might say that they would end themselves.
Yeah.
But if it really came down to the scenario, first off, you probably wouldn't be able to pick. Like, that's an impossible scenario. But being forced to, most people pick themselves. And that's natural. That's
Like
just
save themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's very rare that you actually see people pick the other guy. And that's what it means to be, a hero, right? Is to be selfless in those kinds of scenarios. But my issue is it fair for people to, wait, I'm thinking of the word right now. Antagonize others who choose to put themselves over others. Like, is it fair for me to put myself above you in a given scenario? If it's up to me surviving or you surviving, and I pick myself, is that wrong? Because I think that that's what a lot of people struggle with today, is that they sit there and they think that, okay, my actions are just because they help me. And I'm not saying, like, this isn't me arguing for this side of selfishness. It's just a simple question. And I'd ask all the viewers out there, consider it, right? Is how much do you value yourself over other people?
Well, I think that this actually healthily ties into cynicism as well, because majority of people are cynical in an attempt to preserve themselves. Because if you think about it, cynicism is the belief that everything is bad based on a few bad apples, for example. So your thought process there is pretty much just, I want to protect myself, so I won't open myself up for a chance for that to happen. And in a sense, that is a selfish act, right? You're caring so much about yourself that at times you won't even give people the benefit of the doubt. So I don't think that selfish behavior in and of itself is bad. At times, like I said, it calls for it. But I think that you're not wrong in saying that it's hard to balance the two, and certain situations may not be as black and white as you want them to be regarding selfishness and whether you should help people. But I think that any person here has the judgment to be able to decide when they should focus on themselves and when they should be helping others. That's what I would trust. And even if you don't, at the end of the day, life is a learning game, right?
Yeah.
Even if you make mistakes, at the end of that experience, you will have come out with something learned. And if you didn't learn anything, then maybe you're going to experience it again and again until you do learn it.
You know what I think is there's two ways of living your life. It's living it with everything or nothing, right? And my premise of that is these people that completely cut themselves off from others because they're afraid of being hurt is living with nothing. You live with no happiness and no sadness.
That's exactly cynicism.
Right?
That's the perfect way to describe it.
So it's either that or you choose to live with everything, being both happiness and sadness.
Wow.
Right? So it's an all or nothing game. I think that life is always going to be an all or nothing game. You can't have one without the other, right? It's balanced. So I don't say that one is better than the other. I think from personal experience, I think that all is better, right? Being able to experience happiness and being able to still smile through sadness is the best way of going through life, in my eyes at least. But I question, a lot of people see a lot of bad things. Imagine if somebody grows up in a scenario that's always every man for himself. When they grow up, does it not benefit them to still stay to themselves, right? To be, to a degree, selfish? Because I think, is it worth it to lay down the wire or lay yourself down the wire for other people?
Well,
I don't know.
Again, you can't really argue the ethics of a overall concept that affects 8 billion people.
Yeah.
At the end of the
I agree.
day, each person's going to have their own perspective on what is right and wrong. For me, I choose a route of helping as many people as possible. That's what I would do personally. But others, they'd value themselves and, focus on that.
So
That's up to
I'd
them.
ask you this question.
What?
Would you consider these cynics or people that do things for themselves to be bad people?
I wouldn't say that's. I don't think that you can equate cynicism to selfishness because there are certain aspects that correlate between the two, but they're not the same. Because like cynicism is almost a ideology that people follow. If you think about it, that's exactly where it originated from, right?
Philosophy.
It's a philosophy that people followed. So when you live your life in a cynical manner, many aspects of it become changed. And one of the best ones I can tell you about is an analogy between cynicism and playing poker. Imagine that I play poker, but I fold every single hand without even looking at my cards. That's what being cynical is. You essentially give up every single hand before it even starts because you don't want to risk losing money. But by the end of the game, you've already lost all your money by minimum bets and because you didn't win anything. So if you live your life in a cynical manner, you certainly don't open yourself up to loss, but you also don't open yourself up to gain. And that's a critical point you have to understand when it comes to this philosophy. Because while hurting yourself sucks and leaving yourself open to be hurt sucks, you're also taking away your opportunity to feel joy and happiness and success and gain through all the metrics that people feel happy in life, right? Imagine like there's not really a point in living if you just want to stay stagnant. Again, if that's what you want to do, then that's up to you. But I think that the people who are listening to this podcast are here because they want to make their life fulfilling. They want to be happier. They want to enjoy their time on this planet, right? And you can't do that if all you think are cynical thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I can agree with that.
Or you know what? Another crazy thing is, I was really debating whether I tell this story here or not. But was it yesterday? I believe it was yesterday. We're driving to school, and on the way to campus, I'm at a four-way stop, and I start rolling forward because there's not a single person in the intersection. I go forward, and this guy going 70 in a 50 zone runs the stop sign and slams on the brakes and honks at me after not stopping. We straight up almost died there, okay? And as we drove through the intersection, I just looked at this guy. I was like, are you serious right now? Do you not see the blaring red stop sign right there? And I drove on. For the rest of the day, I thought about the fact that we could have literally died there and how at first I thought, man, people suck at driving. But then I stopped for a second and I realized that is exactly what a cynical person would say. Based on a few subset situations where things went bad, I say the overall population is bad at driving. But you also don't think about the hundreds of people you drive by every single day who drive properly and follow the rules.
I feel like, is this not just pessimism? Like, are they not extremely similar?
Perhaps they're similar, but I feel like pessimism is also associated with,
it's just
what's the word?
Seeing the glass half empty. That's it.
I guess. But it's hard to say. Like I say that they're two different things. I didn't really look at the differences between the two enough for me to draw conclusions, but they're definitely different. I'd say that cynicism is more so a tendency to feel like negative emotions at all times. Or sorry,
I don't know, though.
Pessimism is a tendency to feel negative emotions.
Yeah, I think cynicism is more about not seeing the happiness where everybody else sees the happiness. That's from, because that's exactly what, why can't I remember? Diogenes
Dude,
says.
what is going on with
I don't
you?
know. I just keep on forgetting it.
Okay, but for the record, it has evolved far beyond what it used to be.
But I think that philosophy is pretty brilliant.
Maybe.
If I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I think that the ideas of old cynicism is really good. And I think that we could all learn from it. Because at first, you would look at his actions and be like, oh my God, what is wrong with this guy? This guy's crazy. Everybody called him crazy. Everybody called him this outcast, this outlier that we don't even want to associate ourselves with. Nobody likes this guy. But if you really think about it, I think that that's exactly what our world has completely moved towards today. Literally everybody, by that definition nowadays, or I don't want to say everybody, but most people are cynics. In that, as in they follow the cynicism philosophy. Because a lot of people nowadays don't think just because of what they're told. Well, I guess nowadays they do.
I would argue more people nowadays do what they're told.
Than before? No way.
Well, I would
Absolutely.
no. Here's the thing. I would say 100%. You know why? Because it's just that the thing that we follow has changed. In the olden days, people followed religion to a fault. Like to a T, they follow their religion without
Yeah.
any hesitation.
Absolutely.
Nowadays, people put their belief in a lot of, for example, media companies, government. There's little free thinking these days because people are so constrained by societal
Not
norms.
necessarily. I don't think so.
That's very interesting.
Because
That
like
is
think
very
about how much
interesting to me.
disagreement we have.
Maybe
There's so much disagreement
but
because of
it's
that.
housed in two schools of thought. That's exactly why. So it's not because people are thinking freely. It's because they've been indoctrinated into two groups of people, and those two groups keep fighting.
No, I wouldn't even say that.
How?
There's an infinite number of conflicts out there, even surrounding certain issues.
True,
right?
but
'Cause,
that
like,
doesn't
there
mean
are people
that-
that'll say, "Okay, I'm on Trump's side. I'm on Kamala Harris's side. I'm on nobody's side. Both of these guys are idiots. I'm on Kanye's side. I don't know, right? People are on everybody's different sides. Some people don't even care. I feel like, yeah, it's like if you said in a option, okay, pick one of these three people, then obviously someone's gonna make a decision. But I feel like most of the general population doesn't even care, or they don't actually have a real opinion on it, right? Because it's not something that's really important to them. If you went to somebody and you talked about what's really important to them, then they would.
Okay, well, here's the thing. I think that it's a blanket statement for you to say that people don't care because we live in Canada.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah.
If you lived in the States, that's kind of a big deal because the radical differences in laws between the two parties is huge. Like you could, especially as a woman, though, like the laws implemented by either party could significantly impact your life and your choices moving forward, depending on this
yeah,
election.
but I'm pretty sure most. Actually, okay, you know what? Continue talking. I'm gonna quickly search. We're doing. I'm pulling a Jamie right now. We're gonna
Okay,
bring
Jamie,
up a quick
pull it
system.
up. But like I was saying, if you're gonna say that people don't care, I think that's a very bad blanket statement because I'm gonna assume that some of you out there watching this are American. If you're American, let me know if you are worried about the election or if you're actually concerned with who wins. Because obviously over here we watch it for the entertainment aspect, because American politics is much more interesting than Canadian politics. But still, I believe that there's a huge factor that's gonna affect a lot of you guys depending on how this election wins. Actually, wait, it's going to affect us too because all commerce is impacted by the states as well. Since
Okay,
they're
well,
huh?
in the last election,
Uh-huh.
only 2/3 of the eligible population voted. Of the eligible voting population voted. So it's 66%. So
That actually seems a lot larger than I thought it was going to be.
34% of people that are eligible to vote didn't.
Hmm.
So I think, okay, yeah, definitely it's a blanket statement to say, oh, they don't, like nobody does. But my point being that 66% voted. Let's say 33% is one side, 33% is the other side, and then 33% is people that didn't care enough to do it.
Yeah.
Right. So the way I see it is that nowadays people just generate their own. I think that people have their own thoughts. It's a question of whether they're willing to share it. Right? You never really get to see into people's minds. I think way back in the day, people didn't even have their own thoughts because they just accepted what was told to them as reality. But now we've become far more intelligent, right? I think that people have the thoughts, but they just don't act on it.
Yeah.
Or they don't speak it, right? So I think if you went to anybody in school, because I'd say school is the biggest place. Nowadays, school teaches you what to think, not how to think.
Yeah.
Right? Indoctrination instead of education. I think that if you really went up to a lot of these people nowadays and you ask them, like, what did you learn in school? A lot of things they tell you are facts, right? I learned how to, like, what is this? What is this? What is this? Not so much how to do this, how to do this, how to do this. So what I believe is that as time progresses, people get more knowledge and have ability to free think. They just don't get the space and time to share it, right? Because I think that when you start to speak out and do things differently, people, because of our views nowadays, don't really allow that.
Yeah.
People don't like the guy that's different, which is kind of sad because that's what revolution is.
Well,
right?
I guess that in that sense, the Diogenes version of cynicism was a good factor for change because it made people think differently and it probably resulted in a lot of
You know what's
evolution.
really interesting?
What?
Cynicism and stoicism go hand in hand. And this was something that was really cool to me, is that both of them are based on the same premise of not doing everything just based off of what you're told. That is exactly the premise of both of them,
Yeah.
right? Stoicism is also, obviously it's the idea of, dealing with your emotions through logic and reason. But more specifically, I think Stoicism is about questioning why people are doing what they're doing. Because everybody acts irrationally when it comes, the reason people act irrationally is because they think that that's what's best to do. right? In a given scenario, if you act irrationally, it's because at that time you thought you were making the right decision. Even though whether it be within an hour, a day, a week, a year, you realize that, okay, that wasn't the right decision. You, in the moment, believe that it's a good decision. So Stoicism is just countering that and saying, hey, question your decisions. Right before you make an action, question whether logically it's the best idea, right? And cynicism is similar. It's just, or at least the philosophy of cynicism is question why you're actually doing things. That's what you need to take from it, is that why am I doing the things that I'm doing? You know, if you go to school, ask yourself, why am I going to school? Why am I learning the things that I'm learning? And you need to be open to the idea that the answers might not be what you want them to be. I'd say a lot of the young kids out there that are going to elementary school, for example, and they've seen, oh, Andrew Tate's videos, oh, this guy says school is bogus, so why do I need to learn history? Why do I need to learn math? Why do I need to learn English? The fact of the matter is, it's not about how well you can write an essay or about how many formulas you can memorize or about how many U.S. presidents you might know, but more specifically about the aspects and qualities that you're learning, right? How to be a creative thinker, how to speak fluently, how to memorize things, because that's important in actual day-to-day life. So the thing that a lot of kids, I'd say, nowadays don't do is truly question what they're doing. They question things to the degree that it supports their values, right? They want to be like, oh, school's a waste of time, so why is it a waste of time? And then you say, oh, because I'm just questioning things. But no, you didn't give it a fair shot. The fair shot is that it's teaching you something else, right? So question things and be open to different answers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that it's funny because as I get into it more later, you'll see that questioning things plays a huge part in counteracting cynicism. So that's a key point that I want you guys to keep in mind for a few minutes later down the line. But moving forward, away from Diogenes' perspective of cynicism and more so toward the modern perspective, it's bad for several reasons, right? And I don't really want to continue discussing Diogenes because I think that Diogenes had a really good way of thinking. But unfortunately, it morphed and became something that nowadays is unserving. It's actually funny because the reason why we put so much emphasis on negative material or negativity bias is because in tribal times or way back when, if you if you experienced bad things, you'd want to know about it. And like if your friend went through something bad, you'd want to know about it. If there was a hunter on the loose or some sort of predator out there that you had to be worried about, you'd want to know about it. So that's why our brains are inclined to pay attention to that, because that way of thinking has served us well in the past. But now in this modern world, it can actually be detrimental because of how much information is readily available, right? One of the biggest examples of this is looking at the news. A study was done on people who watch the news, especially in the States, because there's so many people, so it's easy to gather data. And in this study, they found that every single year, for over a period of 30 years, Americans thought that violent crime had gone up every single year. Oh man, it's worse than the year before. That's what they found majority of people saying, because the news covered all these violent tragedies. But when you look at the actual data from FBI statistics and actual crime rates, they consistently declined in years that went forward. But these people put so much emphasis on the negative aspect and worried that the world was consistently plunging into darkness. That is the basis of cynicism right there. It's just assuming the worst in everyone and everything. It's assuming that everything sucks, that there's no point in having optimism or hope because it opens you up to pain. But the funny thing is, as I was doing the research for this episode, and I asked myself what the proper solution to cynicism was, I came across two interesting findings. The first one is that many people initially believe that optimism is a cure to cynicism. Optimism, being happy and hopeful and always assuming the best in people. But when you look at the literature, it shows that optimism is actually not a good cure, because optimism leads you to assume the best in people and therefore open yourself up to threats that could actually be there. You overlook certain flaws and details that would put you on the track to understand this is bad. Cynicism, and this is the second finding that I had, cynicism has been associated as the opposite of naivety, right? People say naive optimism is the worst thing because you believe everything's fine. But as a cynic, I'm making sure that nobody's going to hurt me. So it's the opposite of naivety. When in reality, cynicism is a form of naivety. Think about it. A gullible person unthinkingly believes every single person they see. A cynical person unthinkingly doesn't believe every single person they see. But both of them have a skewed version of the world in their mind. Neither of them are right or accurate. They're both wrong.
You know what's funny?
What?
Goes back to a quote from the great John Adams. To believe all men honest is folly. To believe... Oh, wait.
To believe... Yeah.
To believe none is something worse.
Yo, that was a W quote.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I would say... I mean, yeah, I guess it connects to it, but my question to you is, how do you separate cynicism from pessimism? Because it seems like the entire description of it being, a negative emotion and this and that, or like, you assume the worst in everything, seems to be they seem to be very similar.
Interesting. Pessimism, a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen. A lack of hope or confidence in the future. Very interesting. So it is a very similar.
Okay, wait. Read
definition.
the definition of cynicism one more time.
An inclination to believe people are motivated purely by selfish interests.
So I guess cynicism is just a specified section of pessimism.
Exactly.
I think that's all
yes,
it is. So,
it's a subset.
Yeah,
That's
it's just a subset under pessimism. But I'll just ask you this. Do you think that naive optimism is a good thing?
Naive optimism? No, I don't think so. I think that optimism as a value itself is good. But if you pair it with naivety, it becomes dangerous to the person who believes it. The good thing about it is it doesn't harm other people, but it can harm you, I think.
But because I remember I watched Mark Rober's speech when he was for MIT, the graduating class. And I really loved his speech. It was really good. And he talks about embracing naive optimism because he said in his career, one thing that was, helpful was the fact that he wasn't afraid to just take a leap. Right? Like, for example, think about where he is now versus where he was. A successful engineer at NASA wants to leave and become a YouTuber. Okay? No way, absolutely no way, even the most optimistic person, if you didn't have any naivety at all, if you strictly looked at the logic, it makes no sense. There's absolutely 0% chance that if you weren't naive, you would make that jump. So that's why I would say it, because I think that one of the things we talked about in the earlier episode is overthinking. And if you're not, and it's hard because it's a very fine line you'd have to walk, but if you aren't naive to a degree and you leave every single option open, you look at every single possible reality, I am willing to bet you that in most situations, you will see more possible negative outcomes than positive ones. Because I think that there are more. Whether they're likely or not, right? There may be, it's like with Doctor Strange, right? Versus Thanos. It was like, whatever, there's only one place where we win. Reality
universe,
where we win. One universe where we win. Out of all of them. I think if you really reflect on most scenarios, there are a million ways everything could go wrong and one way it could go right. So I think if you don't embrace a degree of naivety in your optimism, don't you think that you might overthink yourself into not doing anything at all?
That's a very, very good point, and I think you've honestly convinced me that naive optimism to an extent is good. However, I also wonder if naive optimism I would say that it can technically get you in trouble, because what happens if you don't look at the data that you have?
But what I tell you is, isn't the whole point of this to avoid cynicism? And cynicism is what? Not opening yourself up to pain or to gain. So if you aren't, I think that the idea is you might fall, but that's part of the journey, right? The way that Mark Rober described it, I'll just quickly finish this point. What he described it is like it's trying to cross a river jumping on a bunch of rocky stones, right? A bunch of rocks, okay? You don't know if when you jump, the next rock is going to be stable. Right? You have no idea until you actually get to it. Mm-hmm. But he said take the jump anyway. Because what happens? You might fall in the river, but you can pull yourself back up.
True.
Right? So he just said take the jump. That's what's most important, regardless of whether you're going to fall or not.
Okay, the difference between that and my perspective on naive optimism is if I see a shadowy figure in a dark alleyway at 3 a.m, is my first instinct to continue walking the route I normally take if it means crossing that figure or taking a different route? I'd say that logic and data on what my brain thinks will happen leads me to believe that I should take a more potentially safe route.
Okay, I feel like basic common. It's like saying, okay, the highway is going.
That is
should
my
I
point.
run into the middle of the highway
Well,
because there's a chance I get across?
My point is, no, but here's the thing. You don't know. That guy could just be sitting there like smoking a cigarette or something. You don't really know what's going on. My point is, naive optimism in certain senses will get you hurt.
I would say, okay, my view on it is simply that naive optimism in the mental state is very different than the physical state. Like doing physical, concrete actions based off naive optimism is extremely different from doing things that are more mentally strenuous.
Well, if you think about it, everything you do starts as a thought, whether it's leaving your job, whether it's starting a YouTube channel,
absolutely.
whatever
But
it is.
I mean the effect of it. Is the effect going to be on you and your brain, or you getting stabbed by a shadowy figure in the park?
Well, you also quitting your job has a very significant potential physical harm to you if you don't make YouTube work, and then you lose all your money and then you die.
Not necessarily. I don't think, because even, first off, if you've worked at NASA and you leave, it's probably not too difficult for you to land another engineering job. Like, first off, if you're leaping from that high of a height, there's a chance that you're going to land on another building anyway. But the bigger point being, I mean, I would say, don't you think that it's best for people to believe in themselves?
Well, I didn't say that anything about believing in themselves. I meant, again, you're like debating with me about something that is kind of common sense. Like there is a time that calls for both. I don't think that you can't say that naive optimism in and of itself is something that everyone should follow all the time.
Yeah, but any advice literally doesn't work all the time.
You one of the biggest teachings from Diogenes was you can take things from different philosophies and incorporate them into your life.
I made that up.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. You decided that incorporating things from different philosophies.
Yeah, I mean, I completely
important.
agree.
So naive optimism, I'd say it's like making a cake. Let's assume that this cake is your life. Having a sprinkle of naive optimism in there, I think, is necessary.
Yeah, I think
for sure.
Your life is a cake is a great example. There's just different ingredients, right? All the different ingredients could be different ideas, morals, philosophies, religions, even maybe. That's why I'd say I like to look into religions, right? I'm reading the Bible right now, and it's interesting. I actually am quite enjoying it. I think.
Yeah, well, you can obviously talk about that on a future episode.
Yeah.
When you get through the whole thing, you can give a full review on it. But one thing that I think we do have to cover now is also why people are cynical, the negative effects of it, and then how you can treat it. So some of the things that I learned about cynical people, I've already discussed, like our tendency to believe negativity bias, right? And also when I say the term cynical people, it sounds like a negative term. But at the end of the day, we're all cynical in one way or another.
Also, I feel like people have this negative connotation with words, and we've definitely talked about it before. I don't know if I've told the story of dictator and reformer, but I don't think I have.
I don't think so. Go for it. I don't even remember.
It was in my grade 9 humanities class, and we had an activity where we had to basically put people on a scale of whether they were more of a dictator or a reformer, right? And I think the person was Napoleon. I think, or no, I don't remember who it was. But I remember that they did a lot of reform. I think it might have been Napoleon, but they did a lot of reform, but they were also a dictator. Like they were a dictator over their country. Mm-hmm. So everybody was and also, the scale was drawn on the board, right? Left side, reform, right side, dictator. The left side, reformer, was written in green. The right side, dictator, was written in red. Mm-hmm. We went up and we put our Post-it notes, and everybody's putting either in the middle or leaning towards reforming, right? And I put full dictator. And then they were like, okay, why would you put full dictator? He did so many good things. And then I said, who told you that dictator was bad? And then we just sat there because it's everybody just thinks, all the dictators in the past have been bad, which means the term dictator is bad. But that's not true. Just because there are bad apples doesn't mean that the word is a bad thing. It's just a term. It's the same way cynical doesn't mean bad. It just means a person who's thinking in this, manner, in a more selfish manner. It's not a negative aspect. It's just a way of thinking. Do I think that at times it can be harmful? Yes, absolutely. But there's a degree of which you need to understand that not everything is harmful or positive, right? Words are just words. The way that you use them and the, whatever the philosophy behind it is, however you use that, that's where the impact comes from.
True. And that's actually a very, very good and fascinating story about words. Realistically, it's about the connotation you apply to them.
Yeah.
But either way, my point is cynical people, when I say that, it's just a fact. But we all have moments where we are cynical, okay? But why are people cynical? Well, first of all, there is a genetic component to cynicism, and that you can actually inherit part of it from people. And that is a topic that you need to be well versed with the material on epigenetics to understand. But overall, just know that there is a mild genetic component to that. But more importantly, you used to be optimistic, and then you got hurt. That led you to cynicism. The tendency to not let people hurt you, to not give them a chance, to not open yourself up. Do I blame you for feeling that way? Absolutely not. You had more than enough reason to feel the way you do. It sucks to get hurt, but it also sucks to not feel joy. And that's what you do by being cynical. At the end of the day, you're going to get hurt, you're going to feel joy. But like you said, if you choose the cynical path, you feel neither. People will always be cynical in one way or another. And another aspect that I realized was children. Children show cynical tendencies later in life based on how they were raised. It's typically attached to their caregivers and whether they can trust them or not. So if you can count on the people caring on you as a kid, when you grow up, you tend to count on the people around you a lot more. So for me, I grew up knowing that I could trust the people around me. My parents, my grandmother, my friends, I had good trust in all of them. So I built good relationships, and I was very fortunate to be surrounded by people who cared. So as I grew up, my understanding of the world was much more positive, and I tend to trust people a lot more. But if I was hurt by the people closest to me when I was a kid, I certainly wouldn't trust people the same way. So to you out there, if you find yourself engaging in cynical thoughts or behavior, understand that it's not your fault. Things happen, right? Especially growing up, that shapes who you are and how you think. So understanding that is critical in counteracting your cynical thoughts.
Absolutely. You know who the biggest cynic of all time is?
Who?
Shrek. If you watch the first movie, you know this because he actually says this. He's, everybody comes to his swamp and he always says, get out of my swamp. I don't want anybody around me. Do you know why Shrek doesn't want any friends?
Why?
Because every time that somebody sees him, they're like, oh my God, it's an ogre, it's an ogre. And they run away. So he says, I don't want any friends because I don't want to give them the chance to leave me. That was like, when I heard that, I was like, I didn't know that Shrek was that crazy. I didn't know it was that deep of a movie. But man, I felt that like in my core. I was like, I reflected on how so many people must feel that way. That something happened and they don't want to give themselves the chance to get hurt again. And I can see how, or actually no, absolutely, I think it's a painful way to live. Because the point is that you're letting a negative event influence your life. You're letting a negative event take control of how you're going to act moving forward. And I think that that's like the most sad way to live your life. Because the truth is, people think I'm not opening myself up to pain, so I'll be okay. But you already have. Mm-hmm. That's the reality, is that you are letting the pain just eat away at you because you're too afraid to feel anything again. And it's actually goes directly back to your little poker analogy. I was going to say I didn't like that analogy too much because a lot of the time people lose when they play poker. But if you think about it, it makes so much sense. Is that really you may think that you're not losing anything, but little by little, life is going to chip away at you.
There you go.
So little by little, you're going to lose what you have left.
And for the record, I would just like to give credit where credit is due. That analogy came from Dr. Zaki, the philosopher. When I heard that, I was mind blown because that completely put cynicism out in the open for me and explained to me why it is so detrimental to you, right? Because obviously being like careful when it comes to people is important. You don't want to be too trusting, but at the same time, not giving anyone the benefit of the doubt is literally folding every single hand and losing at the game of life. So I'd say that is a bad interaction. But cynics do a lot of things that the average person finds like rather unattractive behavior. So cynics find it very difficult to trust people, right? And I found a really good definition of trust, and it's pretty much putting your well-being in some way, shape, or form in somebody else's hands. Cynics have a hard time doing that because they've been hurt before, so they don't want to engage in that kind of behavior. But it's funny because their steps to isolate themselves arguably hurt them more than the pain they'd feel from other people and potentially opening themselves up. So that's one good point to know, that by isolating yourself, pushing yourself away from everybody else around you, yeah, you might be sparing yourself some pain, but at the end of the day, you're still going to feel other pain in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
And finally, now we're approaching the end of the episode, so I definitely want to get into the solutions of cynicism. How do you stop it? Okay? I think that you're going to really like this one because I think that this is something that you embrace every single day. Do you know what the solution to skepticism is? Summed up in one word.
To skepticism?
Or sorry, damn it, I canned it. That was the solution.
I see.
Okay, well, the solution to cynicism is skepticism. And it's funny because when I Googled the definition for cynicism, it said that a cynicism for it, synonym for it, was skepticism. Which was weird because when I listened to that episode, he described the solution to cynicism with skepticism, because all that skepticism is looking at data and thinking, is this true? It's questioning your belief in something. That's what it is. So when we have cynical thoughts, for example, like I said about the driver incident, where, oh my God, people suck at driving. Okay, what evidence do I have to support this claim? You need to start thinking more like a scientist than an emotional creature. Which, although we can certainly embrace science in a sense. That's what led us to discover so many things in this day and age. So the same is true for your mind. If you treat it like a science experiment and you ask, what does the data support in this situation, it really helps you think about who to trust, when to trust, and more importantly, what you should do moving forward. And there was a very interesting situation about this where the Boston Fire Department was under pressure for wasting money. And a new fire chief came in and looked at where they were wasting. And he saw that there was a policy where firefighters could take any amount of days off that they wanted throughout a year. Any sick days they needed, they could take it. And the assumption behind that was, you guys are out there doing a dangerous job. You're fighting fires. You're inhaling smoke every single day. If you feel off, take the day off. You deserve it. That was the policy behind it. But this fire chief looked and realized, people are taking sick days more often on Mondays and Fridays, probably to extend their weekend because they're lazy and they don't want to come into work. That's not going to happen on my watch. He took a cynical approach to it. Sure, maybe 5 to 10% of firefighters were doing that, but he took that 5 to 10% and applied it to the 100%. So he canceled that policy. And he said, now firefighters can only take 15 sick days a year. Do you know what happened after that? The amount of firefighters that took exactly 15 sick days skyrocketed by 10 times the normal amount. In assuming that everyone acted the way a few selfish people did, he broke the trust between him and his employees. So these firefighters, yeah, they got sick, but more importantly, their relationship in the workplace was broken forever. So they essentially adopted the mindset of, if you don't trust me, I don't trust you. And that's the tragedy of cynicism, because by you being cynical, you also make the people around you more cynical as well. You acting selfishly made them act selfishly. So think about it. If you took the opposite approach, you acted with kindness, optimism, gratitude, and all these different positive emotions, don't you think you would also instill those positive emotions in other people as well?
Yeah.
And that was another study that really blew my mind, because you would assume that cynicism is good in the art of business because you want to be very careful when it comes to money and wasting money and trusting people in your business. But by removing that trust, it's much worse than if you were to just let those few bad apples fall through.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying, combating cynicism, I think it's not just skepticism, but I think an optimistic approach to skepticism. Because I think, because if you think about what, like, Diogenes and them, like, way back when, the idea of cynicism, like, the pure definition of it was still technically skepticism. It's the same premise.
100%.
But nowadays, it's, I believe, a pessimistic skepticism. That's what cynicism is. It's believing that, yes, by the data portraying any amount of negativity means that it must be applied to everything. But if instead you can flip it on its head and embrace optimistic skepticism, I think your life would drastically improve. Because, again, you're looking for the good. Yeah. That's the reality of the world, is what you look for is what you're going to find. So by embracing optimism and skepticism together, I think you find a lot more happiness than you would have opened your eyes up to had you never changed.
Yeah, 100%. And there was actually another really, really interesting study where they asked people, you have a cynical person and a non-cynical person. Which will be better in these tasks? 70% of people said that cynics would be better at cognitive tasks. So essentially saying that they were smarter than the average person. 85% of people said that cynics would be better at social tasks. So figuring out if someone was lying or telling the truth. When you look at the data, it's actually the other way around. Cynics were more likely to fail at cognitive tasks and social tasks because they let their judgment and preemptive decision about someone cloud their actual evidence-based conclusions. And more importantly, when it came to social responsibility and deciding if someone was lying or not, they just assumed that people were lying most of the time because they'd been hurt before and they let that color their judgment. So it's funny to think that we believe that cynics are smarter and more capable than a lot of other people on average. But it's funny because you're putting your faith in someone who doesn't have faith in anyone.
Damn.
That is it was a crazy revelation for me because how can you knowingly trust somebody when that guy doesn't even trust you?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the critical pitfall of cynicism. At the end of the day, like I've said a billion times in this episode, I sound like a broken record at this point. The key point is, yes, life will hurt you, but it's worth it because the joy you feel after that is unparalleled. I would say that, like I told you already, I was raised in an environment where I was fortunate enough to have people who care about me. I live my life in a much more optimistic manner, and I trust people more readily. Did that lead to me getting hurt sometimes? Absolutely. I experienced pain and suffering, for sure. But would I take it back, or would I go back and change the way things happen? Absolutely not. That's the crazy thing is you go through the most painful things in your life, and then at the end of it, if I ask you, would you go back and change it? Most people would probably say no, because that experience made you who you are today.
Absolutely.
So even though I experienced suffering, I am more than happy that I was able to open myself up to other people, allow myself to make relationships with friends, loved ones, and family. And because of that, I'm more happy now than I ever would have been if I took the cynical approach.
Well, brings us to the end of this episode. But before you guys go, y'all already know what time it is. It's episode 40. If you ain't got the rhythm by now, you better pick up the pace because it is time for Quote
of
the
Week.
Harem.
Quote of the week, ladies and gentlemen. Cynicism masquerades as wisdom, but it is the furthest thing from it. Because cynics don't learn anything, because cynicism is a self-imposed blindness, a rejection of the world, because we are afraid it will hurt us or disappoint us. Cynics always say no, but saying yes begins things. Saying yes is how things grow. Stephen Colbert.
Oh, what?
Yep.
Wow.
Insane.
Would never have guessed that.
And it's fascinating because it's true. Honestly, I could not have put it any other way. By not opening yourself up, yeah, you're not going to get hurt, but you're not going to feel joy either. And I think that's a pretty bland way to live life. If I could describe your life as a cynic, it's a beige smoothie when there's steaks, pizzas, and burgers out there. Don't drink the beige smoothies, bruh. Go out there and experience life. Enjoy it, even if sometimes it'll make you sick.
Thank you guys so much for sticking around to the end of episode 40. Another 10 episodes down. Man, we're almost at the big 50. Almost at the big 50. Thank you guys so much for the support over all of this time. We truly appreciate it more than you can imagine. make sure that you go out there and you embrace optimistic skepticism. Combat cynicism. Question everything, but keep an open mind. Smile through both the pain and the joy. And make sure you live a positive life, y'all. Peace out.